Welcome to Metropolitan Faces, the podcast about subway photography. I'm Blake Eskin, and today I'm speaking with Rebecca Davis. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Blake. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. You have put some distance between you and your commuters project, both in terms of time and in space. And we'll get to that, but where are you right now, and what are you up to?
At this very moment, I'm actually in Mexico City learning Spanish and just released a project, a feature documentary film that I've been working on for the past 5 years about community in America and the research of Harvard social scientist and Bowling Alone author Robert Putnam.
And so how's the subway in Mexico City, by the way?
It's great, actually. They actually have gender-separated cars, so I get to ride in the mujeres car with all the women. The reason for that is obviously not something to laugh about. It came out of, some issues on the subway with harassment. But, it's really lovely to be in a car full of women in the morning who are all kind of doing their makeup on their way to work, and it's a unique experience that's very different from the New York City subway.
Well, that's great. When did you first take the New York City subway, or when did you regularly start taking it?
Yeah, so I regularly started taking it shortly after I moved to New York in 2008.
Perfect time to move to New York.
Yes, not the easiest time to be looking for a job in journalism. But I initially started taking it as a commuter myself, and then later took it as the main way not to just get to my job, but to get to my assignments around the city as a journalist.
Right. And did you grow up in a place with a subway? Did you grow up with public transportation, or was this all very new to you?
I did. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. suburbs in a town called Falls Church, Virginia. We were on the Orange Line train, the D.C. Metro, so I had to get used to saying subway when I moved to New York instead of Metro. And my father and a lot of the parents in our town would commute into Washington. It was a close suburb of D.C. On the Metro. And it has a great, it still does to this day, 70s color palette, that kind of burnt orange color that was very popular in the 70s. It's a carpeted train. I think there's a lot of, the carpeted versus non-carpeted train systems is always like something that I note when I travel. And the D.C. Metro is a carpeted train versus the New York City subway that you want to, be able to Clorox down at the end of the night just because of the sheer number of people that are riding that transportation system every day.
Yeah, and so do you remember kind of first impressions of the New York City subway having come from the D.C. Metro?
Yeah, it's a little rougher, I would say, around the edges, a lot more rats. And the D.C. Metro is a pretty a little bit of a cleaner subway, and it has a beautiful, it's well known architecturally for the inside, kind of beautiful architectural design. The New York City subway is not, from my understanding, as well known architecturally as far as the design of the tunnels and the platforms itself. It's a functional system, I would say. But, I think the thing that drew me to it, and this is something also that's different from the Metro, is you face each other on the train seats. So the visual excitement around the New York City subway for me was always the people that you're looking at more than the architecture of the train itself. And I think that's a different experience when you're riding in a train where the seats are L-shaped versus, seats that are kind of running along the edges where you're looking at people face to face across from you.
Totally, yeah. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share this tab. This is the first picture of yours that I saw on the subway when I went to your various feeds. And so this is from Instagram. Mm-hmm. It's from October 17th, 2011. It's geotagged from the Marcy stop on the JMZ.
Yep.
So was this the first picture you took on the subway?
I'm trying to think. If not, it might have been like very early. I don't know if I can say definitively it was the absolute first. Maybe the first that I felt was good enough to post to Instagram. And I'd have to go back through and look at my Instagram, but I think I was probably new even to the platform of Instagram at that time.
And Can you just describe the picture for us?
Sure, sure. So there's three people in the frame. One woman has a laptop out on her lap and looks like she's kind of doing some last minute work, maybe on her way to the office, potentially, or homework. And then two, very tired New Yorkers, either probably heading to work or coming home after a long day, both kind of getting a little bit of rest in. And one gentleman's listening to some music on headphones on one side of her, and the other side of her, a woman that's just kind of resting on her arm.
Yeah, just like holding her head, like oof.
Yes.
And do you remember what made you take this picture, or what made you start doing these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think this picture specifically, I think I was interested in. This subway in a lot of ways is like the living room of New York, where everyone is kind of oddly comfortable just doing what they need to do, and not necessarily paying attention a lot, which is, I think, true of a lot of the existence in New York. There's just so many of us right on top of each other. So people can get away with, kind of living in their own world and no one next to them paying attention. And that juxtaposition has always been a thing that's interested me visually about being in New York. And so, I think I was probably drawn to this image here to make it because, here's this woman who's just pulled out a full laptop and is kind of doing work. And then, I think sleeping in public also requires a certain level of comfort and is, something that's a very frequent sight on the New York City subway, especially, with people that have longer commutes to the further boroughs outside Manhattan.
And was Marcy your stop at this time, or were you just going there for some reason?
It would have been my stop, yeah. Like a lot of young New Yorkers, I think I lived in 10 different apartments in 10 years when I, first moved to the city, kind of bopping around as rent rose year over year. But for many of those apartments, I was off that JMZ train, which is a fun one because it's above ground and then later underground as it gets into the city. So you kind of interesting things happening. With lighting there as you have natural light coming into the train, in the Brooklyn part of the train's line before it goes underground.
Yeah, and there's also this like sort of blue cast. Like I think you said in interviews, this was like a filter from Hipstamatic, which for those of you who do
Yeah.
not remember, it was kind of like it was like Betamax to the VHS that became Instagram. It was the maybe better, but like the one that didn't stick around. Yeah, and so, and for a lot of your pictures, you're using this blue filter.
I am, yes.
How come? Why'd you choose that?
Yeah, I had actually studied photojournalism in undergrad at the University of Virginia and then later at the University of Texas, and started my career in New York as a freelance photographer. But I fell in my photographic training directly on that line between the film and digital transition. So I started college in 2001. I think the first digital cameras had just come out. They were maybe like 2 megapixel sensors or something. Our iPhone, far exceeds now the capacity of those early digital cameras. But I came up learning darkroom techniques and how to process film, and was shooting on film through graduate school when I finally had to give it up because photo editors for the news were no longer taking assignments coming in on film. But I think this Hipstamatic app that was a early iPhone photography app, I think played into that nostalgia that some of us had for that filmic look, that would have different color casts. And I think I maybe early in this project, as I was starting to shoot on the subway, was probably experimenting with different quote unquote films that you could use on Hipstamatic. You could choose different film filters. And I think ultimately, as I started doing the project then in a more committed and serious way, I think I had like a specific Hipstamatic film that I was trying to shoot everything on. So it had kind of a similar look and feel, which did end up having a little bit of this green, kind of greenish blue cast.
Yeah, and and the subway is kind of two main colors depending on the line. It's like a sort of anonymous blue, or it's that sort of yellow and orange, the complementary color of this cast. So it's an interesting choice.
Totally. Yeah. I think, those harsh fluorescent lights that none of us look great in as we're riding on the train.
I want to share just like one other picture, and this one is this couple. This is posted on Valentine's Day,
Mm,
and that I'm guessing that was intentional, but it's a couple sharing earbuds, which is
mm,
one of my favorite tropes. But they're kind
yes.
of like you could fit a whole person between them, or at least like like a preteen. Like they're together and so not together. It's
Yep.
really I love lovely. Um,
Yeah, I think I was really drawn a lot as I've been kind of refamiliarizing myself with some of the pictures I took over the course of this year or two that I was really committed to this project, and I was really interested in kind of couples and their body language together on the train, and then also strangers and their body language together on the train, and kind of how. Like in the previous photo, how you have two people who, don't know each other at all, but then are in a very comfortable situation, maybe sleeping next to a perfect stranger. And then, how you see couples interacting together, whether they're, acting like they know each other well or don't know each other well in this case, the space between these two, yet they clearly know each other, connected by this headphone cord for the music that they're listening to.
right. So like the first picture I find is like October. You're starting the end of the year, starting to take these pictures, and by April you have
Mm-hmm.
set up a Tumblr at like I think it's newyorkunderground.tumblr.com, and which you named commuters. So where does this go from like thing I notice sometimes to project?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just at that point, I want to say I'd been hired. I was initially a freelancer when I moved to New York for the New York Daily News, and I was only on assignment for them twice a week when I was first a freelancer. And then I got hired on full time. I think it would have been right around 2011 that I came on as a full time employee with them and would have been working for them then 5 days a week. And since I was the on their digital video team for the New York Daily News, so it was kind of a funny position in this, very kind of well established print newspaper in the New York media scene, but who was starting to experiment with more, digital offerings for their readership. So digital video. So I was doing stuff for the website, NewYorkDailyNews.com. But the budgets for the paper and the digital side were not the same. So while all the photographers for the newspaper all had cars that were paid for by the paper, on the digital team, I don't even know that I was getting reimbursed even for my subway, my monthly subway ride. But I had to take the subway to all my assignments, unless one of the photographers was kind enough to let me hitch a ride with them. So needless to say, working for a daily paper, I was taking the subway a lot every single day as I was running around to my various assignments. And so I think that just put me on the train kind of constantly. I was taking the train to work in the morning, getting my assignment. And then, at the Daily News, it was an amazing place to get to start as a journalist in the city. They were sending me to the far reaches of all the boroughs, for stories every day. So I was and sometimes going from lower Manhattan, where our office was, way out to the top of the Bronx. So, riding the train sometimes for 2 hours a day to get to my assignments. And then really just wanting, I think, something to pass the time while I was on the train. So it gave me something to do. I would always get into a car and then look to who I want to be positioned across from as I would kind of scope out who might potentially make good photographs.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk more about kind of like, because I mean, this is very familiar to me. Like for me, like I was, I had two kids at home and I had a very demanding like editorial job. So for me, when I was between places, like the subway was my only kind of creative space,
Mm-hmm.
my only place where I could do that. And I sort of turned it into, I don't want to call it a game exactly, but a project with rules.
Mm.
Like, and so you just mentioned you're like, you walk in, you've got, and you're using an iPhone, right, at
Yep.
this point, and do you remember I can't remember what was 2011, like maybe
I
six or
know.
seven
Yep.
or
Yep.
something like that. But like, So walk me through, I don't know if it's like the rules of the game or like the workflow. Like, so you get on the train, you kind
Hmm.
of scope it out,
Yep.
you position yourself across from someone who looks like a good picture, and then what are you doing? Are you just like were you using like a remote trigger? Were you using special apps? Were you just using the regular camera? Were you like sneezing or creating distractions? Like, how did you go about it?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I was using the regular camera on the phone and kind of positioning myself in a way, I wanted to go unnoticed by the people I was photographing because I wanted to catch them in kind of authentic moments. Um, and I think I quickly saw that the iPhone had become a tool to do that we hadn't had before because it was unassuming, it was small, and I could potentially just be reading or looking through something on the phone. So I think I would position the phone kind of right above my face, where it'd be about eye level at the person across from me that I was photographing, but then, it could also just look like I was looking intently at my phone while I was in fact taking pictures of people. And I was aware because I had studied photography in school, in undergraduate and in graduate school too, in photojournalism. I was aware of work in the subway that had come before me, and I knew I was familiar at the time with kind of this tradition, and I saw that in the way that Walker Evans had kind of rigged up this remote trigger famously down his arm, where he had a trigger on his that he could click from down his coat, and then he hid the lens. I think like through a button in his coat. I felt like the iPhone was kind of our modern equivalent to be able to do that, and was excited by that.
And also as a, I guess, like, because I've talked to some people who are more kind of hobbyists than professional journalists, and for them, like, there's a element of the sort of like the like, I guess, like, this is a new ethical situation for them, or this is a new kind of also a new kind of risk profile for them. Like,
Mhm.
so did you like feel different in these settings? Like, you probably did candid photography in other settings. So does this feel any different for you? Or did you approach it differently?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I am a true believer in kind of the history of street photography, and I really value the fact that we live in a country where when you walk out the door, you are vulnerable to potentially be photographed and, potentially be in a news story if you're out on public property. And I think part of that agreement is when I'm behind the camera and know that other people are vulnerable to that, I also know the same goes for me. And when I'm out in public, people could potentially be photographing me, and I could potentially end up, in a news story because I'm out in public in a place, or I could end up as part of art, legally in our country, if I'm walking down the street and someone snaps a photo of me. And if anyone were to have written to me that they didn't want their photo posted for any reason, I would take that photo down because I don't think any one of these photos, has to be up to tell some story, journalistically, where maybe I would not take it down if they were, part of a moment of some historic thing that was happening. But in the case of that project, that didn't happen. I did have some people reach out, though, and ask for copies of their photos. So couples that I captured that later saw their photos posted online and sent it to them. And I think the last thing I'll say on that is just, with that, I do think comes a certain responsibility, though, that you're, as you're photographing people, understanding that vulnerability that people are in when they're in public, and making sure that you're not approaching it in any way that's meant to like mock people. That feels, that's where kind of that line was drawn for me. I really just wanted to have it be something that was like just more of a celebration of people's humanity in the city.
Is there like an example of a picture that you would not you hesitated from taking, or a picture that you took and decided not to post because it gave you pause like that? Anything come to mind?
Um, Nothing in particular. comes to mind for that. I think the subway is an extremely public place. As far as public versus private spaces where people could potentially be photographed, and I think, again, this is me coming from a photojournalist kind of background. It's like you're on the subway, you're in the US, you're a citizen, you should expect that you could potentially be photographed at some point.
Right. No, I also kind of come out of like, more kind of writing about than doing it. But like, it's interesting because now I encounter students who may be less familiar with that, and they think any candid photography is creep shots or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very different kind of context for them. It's interesting how that kind of the tradition and how it's developed and what it means for
Mm-hmm.
different people. I guess I want to.
Yeah.
That's neat though. Like that people, kind of found themselves and asked for copies. That's great. So it sounds like
Yeah.
you captured something real about them, and you do capture such sweet things about. I mean, I know we talked about that one picture of the sort of the distanced couple, but you really do capture really beautiful connections between people in these.
Yeah, and I think some of that is because New Yorkers maybe let down their guards so much in public, as we walk around and kind of live in these bubbles. I think that allows, photographers to be able to capture some of that vulnerability that might not be possible in other cities where people don't act so, authentic out in public and on the street.
Right, right, right. And so I guess we get from so April you start the Tumblr, and then at a certain point, like I think in kind of almost a year later, early 2013, you release this video, which was kind of I think sort of the pinnacle of the attention the project got. Commuters 2012. It's this
Mm-hmm.
3-minute video, and when did you decide to make this? When did you figure out this was a form this project was going to take?
Yeah, I think it was probably around the fall, like late fall, I would say, of 2012. And it was kind of an accident of the way the camera functions on the iPhone. When you go to your photos to look through and you kind of, run your finger along your photo gallery, if you're looking for a photo, it kind of does a sort of flipbook effect. And I was realizing that often I would sit across from someone and maybe take 10 or 12 frames until I captured in photo tradition, what would be considered the decisive moment, where there was some sort of punctum. I'm reaching very far back now in my photo education history, but just a little something. If I'm remembering the definition of punctum, that kind of pulls the viewer into this photo, and gives it some dynamics. So I would be looking for that one frame, usually of the, 10 or 12 that I took. But I was realizing as I went back, into my photo gallery to look and pick the photos at the end of a day or something, that there was this flipbook effect as I would run through them. And I think in doing that, I realized, I'm capturing a little bit of a flipbook when I take 10 to 15 frames of someone. And at that point, I was working, as mentioned, as a video producer from the Daily News, so kind of straddling both the still world and video world. And I realized, could I pull these photos into video form and do something, a little more dynamic in video with them?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, I didn't think of the word flip book, and it totally makes sense to what you're talking about. That sort of iPhone swiping catalog. The effect is it's sort of like a, I don't know, it's like a GIF. It's like a film strip. It's
Mm-hmm.
also kind of like a contact sheet at the same time.
Yep.
And it's so interesting looking at these things. I'm going to share another still picture with you. And it's this, can you tell us about this couple?
Yeah, I think if I'm remembering them correctly from the video, I think this couple, and the fun thing about the riding the train is which was something I think I wanted to express in the video form of this, is which is an interesting thing about photography too, right? There's the moment that you take the photo, but the photographer also knows the moment that happened before and the moment that happened after, in their memory of the experience of being there. The cool thing that I think I was able to show once I brought this into video form is I was able to bring the audience watching the video into that before moment and after moment of the ultimate photo that, became the one I selected for the photography side of the project. And so this couple, if I remember, I photographed them as they're sitting down together. They kiss each other. They separate from each other. And if I remember correctly, I think one of them then leaves the train and leaves the partner.
Yeah, he gets off the
Yep.
train. And he just for the listeners, like he's in a red shirt, he's wearing a cross.
Mhm.
He has like a red brimmed black baseball cap, and she is in more of a, well, I don't know, you're using filters, so she's in more of a kind of like black and gray,
Mhm.
or maybe it's bluer or greener. But there's this real sense, and then there's just this moment where he disappears, and you really feel this absence. And they're also sitting in, and I've never thought to call it the love seat, but it's like that
Yes, I love that.
two-seater part of the subway,
Yep.
and like they're sitting in that like seat just for two people, and you just really feel his absence when when he disappears in the video. And even now, looking back at the picture, know that he's going to get up and leave, and
Yeah.
I have this sense that the moment is going to end. Whereas like you talk about the decisive moment, in if we never saw anything but this photograph, this couple would always be kissing on the subway.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, there's that thing that I think a lot of us, when we sit in these seats across from people on a subway, and you capture them kind of like lost in thought as you look at their faces, and you're lost in your own thought too as you're riding. And I think I was also always really interested in that. I was just, as a journalist too, naturally, I was just like, oh, what is that person across me thinking about right now? As you see either a smile come up across their face, or many times you see people crying on the train, or, and I think with this couple, they kiss, he leaves, and then the photos after, it's her alone, and you're kind of like, what is she thinking right now as he left? Is she thinking about him? Is she thinking about what she's going to have for dinner? Is she thinking about how they're going to break up or get married? Or, you don't ever know unless you ask the person. But that aspect of that energy as you stare across at a stranger's face and kind of wonder what's going on in their head was always interesting to me too.
Yeah, there was also this one where there's a kid on. This is one of the L-shaped ones, L-shaped trains. There's a kid, probably 6 years old, in sort of gingham shorts, and got a American flag, and all pooped out on the lap of, I think, his mother or some woman in his life, protector woman in his life. And in the video, you kind of see how he wore himself out. And at the same time, you see how you went after this picture. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I think it was fun to I think another reason I wanted to pull it together as like it was a year on the New York City subway, I think is the one piece of text at the beginning in 2012. There's different things that you see at different times a year on the subway. And I'm not sure the date on this one, if it was like around Memorial Day or Veterans Day that he would have had an American flag.
Late May, in fact.
Yeah. Okay. So, and earlier there was one that was Valentine's Day. I think we all know like SantaCon time of year when all the Santas are on the train, or, Pride, and so you can know from the photos a lot of times what's going on the street above because of the like ephemera that people are bringing onto the train with them at different times of the year. And I was interested in that. And then, I think also in, thinking before we hopped on this call about what was going on at that time in New York City in 2012. We were 1 year after the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. And at that time, I was working at the Daily News also, and that was a big deal at the Daily News because, they had covered 9/11 in 2001. I was still in college then, but revisiting that time 10 years later, was a big part of my coverage. And so the American flag icon, which I think became a big part of all of our lives in those years since 9/11, as we started seeing that symbol kind of plastered around the city. that was kind of in my head a lot at that time. Also in 2012 in the fall was Hurricane Sandy. And in 2011 was also Occupy Wall Street, which was a big thing in New York City at that time. So, I think I was also thinking a lot about the things that were being kind of brought up, as I was working on this project, whether consciously or subconsciously. They were in my head, these ideas of class and how do we all live together in this place. What does it mean to be 10 years out from 9/11, this moment that continues to shape what America is today. And as I was trying to figure out how it was shaping New York too, as someone who was an outsider moving to the city and starting to work for the New York Daily News, not being from New York but trying to understand the city as I was covering it.
It's so interesting because, like, the Daily News in 2023 is such a different thing right now. The idea that the print reporter would have gotten the car. I mean, the print reporter may not have a job
Yes.
anymore. And whereas the digital video
Yes.
producer is like maybe still taking the subway and maybe still having to use their unlimited Metro card, but, slightly less precarious. That's part of what's so interesting.
Yes. The lesson is maybe they should have given the digital producer the car.
Yeah.
Might be in a different. No, I'm just kidding. And actually, I am very pro subway and anti car. I will say on this podcast. And I think part of that is I came to have such an affection for public transportation. Living in New York, riding it for work, and photographing it. So I would not have traded that. But yeah, I mean, I was really working at the Daily News in what I considered kind of the last gasp of this era of kind of the great, print publications when, there were a lot of reporters there who had been there for decades and decades that I was learning from. How to cover scoops in the city and how to follow the money. And I will say there continues to be amazing reporters and reporting coming out of the Daily News, but I think it was the last era where they still had robust resources. Like so many papers, they've had to deal with, tighter budgets in recent years. And, I think difficulty that all the papers are dealing
Right.
with. Yeah,
And
financially.
so when you made this video, it got some really nice coverage, from, places like Bloomberg and Fast Company, from some, sort of from web publications. It was even the Daily Mail picked it up, Petapixel picked it up. So it was picked up in the online photo community, picked up in the sort of neat things on the internet community.
Mm-hmm.
How did all that happen? Did that surprise you? What were you hoping would happen? Were you hoping that this would turn into a larger project, or were you just kind of happy to have some attention? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I was obviously happy to have it get some attention. I think we're in that moment where internet videos, everyone's trying to do this now. I think maybe we weren't quite trying quite so hard at that time, but to kind of like hit a viral moment. So things would kind of go viral when they got picked up by one publication and other places were seeing it. And people were spent, even, the fact that this was on like a Tumblr at the time, it was like this era where people were curating a lot of just fun things from the internet and on web pages more than they are today. I think now it's more, we're in our apps, we're in Instagram more or on the Twitter app, and maybe less so on kind of these web pages where people have like a photo blog. Now Instagram would probably just be your photo blog. But I think it was because of that moment that we were in the internet that it was able to get picked up, because there were like a ton of these websites that were curating things, cool things from around the internet like this. And it was able to hit a viral moment in a way that now I think if I wanted this to get pick up on a lot of attention, it would probably be solely almost in the app itself of Instagram.
right.
There were things that were, I think, unique to the time of this project. But I also think I felt aware, even as I was photographing it, I think because I knew the work of Walker Evans and, other people I'll mention are like Bruce Davidson, who was photographing the subway in the 80s. And then even
Mm-hmm.
Stanley Kubrick, the director, did
Sure.
photography early in his career and was kind of in between those two, also on the subway. I had the sense that even if it wasn't some great piece of art in the moment, it was pedestrian in some ways, just life on the train. I felt like just the act of making that collection of what it looked like on the train, 20 years, 30 years from now, as even if I was the only one revisiting it 30 years from now, it could exist as a sort of like time capsule,
Hmm.
to what people were wearing at that moment. And I knew it could have kind of different legs in the world in different times, and I was excited by that.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of what people were wearing in the moment, one of my favorites, and I just, orange was a favorite color before I started photographing on the subway, but like
Mm.
I love subway orange, and you have this great picture of, you can't see her face, I think her face, but it's like a woman in a orange sweatsuit with orange sneakers on the orange seat, with a
Yep.
sort of maybe somewhat yellowish, but you know, at least orange adjacent poster behind her. And it just like, it's just this great like shot of color, infusion of color is such a wonderful thing that you're seeing, just like what people wear, how people are out in the world.
Yeah, and I think those moment of serendipity that happens that a photographer is kind of like always trying to keep their eyes peeled for when, something as simple as just someone, matching, the thing behind them or, how our bodies are interacting with shapes and colors in the world and kind of just looking for those fun moments of serendipity. So here, where you have this woman kind of perfectly matching the seat that she's in, and even just seeing someone in a full, monochrome down to the shoes outfit is, I think also just a funny thing to happen upon out in the world.
Yeah.
At this time, I think, there are also a lot of street style blogs,
Hmm.
and New York is a great place for that because, people just do have very kind of unique senses of style,
Right.
in what they're wearing. Yeah.
Now, at a certain point, maybe it's in 2013, you sort of transition from like, hipstamatic filter to less filtered or unfiltered. And
Mm.
you also changed jobs somewhere around there. You
Yep.
start working, I think, at NBC.
Yeah. January 2013, I started working at NBC, and then I wasn't on the train for work as much except for to go to the office. And I think one thing that was different was when I was at the Daily News, I was often out in the middle of the day, which allowed me to often get a seat and actually be sitting across from someone. When I was commuting to 30 Rock at 8 a.m. in the morning, I was in the full rush hour crunch, and it was a lot harder to get that I'm sitting in a seat and I'm across from someone else sitting in a seat. I was often standing. I was lucky if I got a seat on the subway then. And so part of like those hours were also impacting my ability to shoot.
I mean, one thing I saw, and I don't know if you noticed that, but like when you go back through your Instagram feed, and I had to go quite a ways back because you are still a prolific Instagram photographer, is this kind of combination. It's the juxtaposition because you shot a lot in the in the green room at the Today Show, or
Mm-hmm.
in or like I guess Today does stuff outside, or in
Yeah.
this sort of the studios kind of open to the world. And so there are these moments where you're like, it's like pictures of two celebrities posing, and then it's like someone in an intimate moment on the subway. I don't know if you saw this as you were going through your Instagram, but like I just wanted to kind of remark on that, like juxtaposition between like you're both looking at like real A-list people
Uh
in a
huh.
really intimate environment who know that they're being photographed, and yet they're
Mm-hmm.
like on a couch and they're almost that same distance from you, and then
Mm-hmm.
at the same time you're looking at people on the subway.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think is often kind of something that's always excited me about being a journalist, the ability to kind of weave in and out of different worlds and spend time with people that are getting asked questions every single day because they're famous and they're constantly being interviewed and living a life in a certain way, and then the ability to spend time with people living life in a totally different way where maybe it's their first time talking to someone from the news and sharing their story. And I think one thing I will say too that drew me to the subway as a space, and it's something that I think makes New York really unique, is, increasingly in our communities in the U.S. we live in very segregated bubbles of class, where you could be living in a wealthy suburb in the U.S. and really never see other people outside of your class, unless, they're at places maybe where, like at a restaurant where they might be working. But then you're often getting in your car and then going home and then spending time in your very class segregated community. And I think a beautiful thing about the subway that I've always loved is it's the one place where you're seeing a lot of class
Yeah.
mixing happen, as wealthier bankers might be taking the train to work because it ends up being, faster than taking an Uber, even if they could afford other modes of transportation. And you're seeing them sitting, right next to kind of a more working class person. And I think there's fewer and fewer spaces where that happens in the U.S. And so it was something that always drew me, I think, to the subway because it's a leveling kind of place in that way, or in terms of everyone's using the space.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
also this, we've talked about some pictures of great connection, and then there are these pictures of that you've taken on the subway of kind of great disconnection too. I mean, I've just pulled up a picture. It's a woman. She's sitting alone in the love seat, and she's in a black dress,
Hmm.
has kind of like a scowl and a sort of 100-yard stare down. And then there's, and really the most colorful thing in the picture is this ad in the top left, and it's two people kind of, I guess they don't clink, but they're, toasting Budweiser beers, glowing Budweiser beers, and, reinforcing kind of how alone this woman is. And so, like, the subway shows, like, you pick up, like, when you're looking one of the things I just noticed, is just like when you're looking at couples or maybe families or people together, there's real, you're capturing connection. And when you're looking at people alone, often you're seeing, you're seeing a real sense of loneliness.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that the experience in the city can also often be a very lonely experience, and this juxtaposition. I think that anyone can know in the city, even if you are someone who has a very dynamic friend group. It can be a place where you're surrounded by millions of people, but then can often feel very alone in that environment. And I think that juxtaposition of kind of a lone togetherness in the city, of you could be feeling internally very, very isolated in a moment, even while being surrounded by a lot of people. I think that's a dynamic of city life that's always been interesting to me. And I think in this one too, this thing that I mentioned before of the always kind of wondering what's going on in someone else's head when you look out across from them, what type of pain they might be carrying around, and the fact that on the train you have to carry that pain in public. You're not alone in your car just looking out at the street, but you're sitting across from a stranger while you're having whatever kind of internal dialogue might be going on. Yeah, and I think you're right that I was kind of looking for both those things as I was looking at people that I was photographing, both the isolation of the city life, and then also the beautiful relationships that are playing out on the subway too.
Yeah, and people are really picking up on that, and that in there people are commenting on that and noticing this, noticing or perhaps projecting a sadness onto this woman, and in other pictures, kind of noticing and celebrating the sort of the connection between people. Walker Evans didn't have Instagram
Mm.
to egg him on, or maybe shame him or make him worry about getting canceled or whatever that things are. Like, I'm just kind of curious, like, is this how many projects do you do that are kind of like in the open this way? Like when you're making a movie now, it's a different kind of project because you get feedback in really different ways.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm just curious about like the feedback loop and how it
Mm-hmm.
was encouraging or discouraging or helpful or distracting as you were doing this. And, if you've had other projects where you've kind of done them in the open
Yeah.
on social media. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was the one maybe that I committed the most time to. I think for a while at NBC, I was photographing some of our office food that got, I think cataloging things has always been like an interest to me as a photographer. But I think you're right. And I think that makes the Instagram photo gallery kind of experience unique from what it would have been like when I first started studying photography, where you would wait till you kind of had a complete body of work edited and put together, or even in working for a newspaper, if you're going to put together a photo gallery, you kind of are thinking about the beginning, middle, and end of that project before it then goes out in the world. What Instagram brought, or photo blogs at that time, I had a blog spot before that, and then this project was going up on Tumblr. You are opening up, you're showing your work kind of to the audience while it's happening, which I think, like you said, could help spur you on because you have that audience. I think people started to follow my account because they were, expecting some of these subway photos at that time. So I felt like people were following along and waiting for kind of the next post. But yeah, I think it's a different thing than when kind of sit at the end of a long project. You do all the production up front and then are like, okay, now I'm going to make an edit and put this out into the world. The audience is coming along with you while you're in the process of doing the project itself, which is unique.
Is there one you like better?
One way of working.
Do you like one way of working? Like, do you wish, as you were working on this movie for 5 years, that you would have had more people cheering you on? Go Rebecca. Oh, that clip looks great. What a great day of shooting. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, like, is there...
Yes, maybe there would have been less tears in the production of it if I'd had some of that encouragement to know I was going in the right direction and had someone to say, keep going. Um, I think it depends on the project. In the case of this photography project, I liked people following along because it was like they were coming along on my train ride. With this documentary I just worked on, there was a much more complicated narrative that went beyond just like the visual that I really needed to make sure I was getting it right before I got it out in the world. And I think the same would be true with like the journalism that I was doing at NBC. I'm wanting that time to kind of fact check my story, do enough reporting to make sure what I think the story was at the beginning is actually what it is as, time goes on or as I'm talking to more experts in a way that, with the photography, it was much more kind of visual and open to interpretation of the viewer.
You talked about kind of reviewing this work and you hadn't looked at it for a while. So what are you seeing or not seeing that surprised you? Like, do you remember more of something, less of something? What patterns are you noticing that you didn't see that were there before?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is screaming out to me when I look at these photos is not a lot of people are on their cell phone yet. So this is 2012. I think if I tried to do this project now, almost everyone would be looking at a phone. It would be me looking through my phone to take a picture of someone else looking at their phone. And I think, the iPhone had come out in 2007, 2008, but not everyone had them yet in 2012. I had maybe just transitioned from a BlackBerry, I think, because a lot of us in the news were still on BlackBerries. So it hadn't quite fully taken over our culture in the moment, to the extent that it has now, where everyone is just always on their phone. And now when you see a lot of couples together, I often notice like, two couples sitting together, not talking to each other in their own phone world. I think there would be a lot more photos of that, of two people sitting by each other, not having a conversation, not embracing, not kissing each other, which was captured in a lot of these photos because they're so engulfed in what's happening on their phone. And certainly also having worked in the news media, I think I watched how there was an acceleration too of just how much information we were pumping out to people's phones, leading into kind of the election in 2016, where there was kind of, just this constant, full transition to the real, 24-hour, just news cycle. Every second there was kind of just new things. So I think that would be a big difference. And it was something I remember noticing when I looked at Walker Evans' project. You see a lot of people like train cars filled with newspapers. Everyone had their big kind of broadsheets open, which is really something of that moment. And I think, I was kind of capturing that between moment, I think in 2012, where everyone wasn't totally, there's really not a lot of phones in these photos. But I was able to use the phone kind of as a new tool to capture something that wouldn't have been possible when I used to be lugging around a big camera with me. But I was still able to catch these kind of authentic moments of like human connection. Even catching those moments of loneliness and isolation, I think would be harder now, because I think people don't get lost in thought as much on a train. This is just anecdotal, but I feel like in recent train rides, I don't see that as much, because they'll just immediately go to their phone, and start looking at something else instead of kind of sitting with their thoughts.
You never quite. I mean, I saw you took a vacation to Berlin. You were in Hong Kong. You were on the subway on both of those. Took a few pictures, and even went, though you kind of wound down the Tumblr. Or I mean, a lot of people abandoned Tumblr, so that's not that that's
Yes.
special. But like,
RIP. Yeah.
but like you still have, every once in a while you're still taking a subway picture. And so I guess I want to understand, like, why did you stop, or why did you tail off? Did you stop? Why am I not seeing from Mexico City the pictures? Like all those questions.
Of the train. Well, now I'm inspired. I'm gonna challenge accepted. Like I'm gonna have to get on the train and start taking some. Um, I think the project itself was really tied to my time at the Daily News. So I was feeling really just like in New York in my head, and in New Yorkers, and on a professional level, and then just on a personal level, in that I was spending that much time on the train. So I think as I left that work, the train continued to have hold a great place of affection in my heart, but just photographically, the kind of the people of New York weren't occupying my mind in the same way that they were when I was covering city news every day. And so, I think it kind of, just trailed off as I wasn't on the train as much anymore for work and wasn't covering New York. But I think I, remained like a public transportation enthusiast from, my love of being on that train and covering the city. And so then as I travel to other places, one of the first things I always do is try to get on their local public transportation, even if I don't necessarily have to. Like, even if I could walk somewhere, I'll try to take the train just as an activity to like explore what is the train like here compared to New York.
Not as a photographic activity necessarily, just as an activity.
Yeah. I think just as a public transportation enthusiast. And like you said, I maybe snapped kind of like a few photos, but it's not kind of like a project that's occupying my mind as much anymore.
You used the phrase earlier, alone together, and made me think about Bowling Alone, which is, of course, the book that is most famous by Robert Putnam, the subject of your documentary, which is called Join or Die, and which has a really nice resonance both with the idea of joining clubs, but of course, Join or Die is the slogan of well, you explain it because I'll get it wrong, but you've been in this for 5 years. So Join or Die it's a colonial slogan, right? Or an anti-colonial slogan.
Yeah. It came from a famous political cartoon at the moment, as the states in the U.S. were fighting from independence from the U.K. and this idea that we need to join together or, we're not going to make it as this new nation that we're trying to build here. And yeah, for our film, we kind of wanted to capture, a similar idea about coming together, but more for the need to save our democracy, which is what Robert Putnam wrote about in Bowling Alone, that these kind of, softer things in our life, community connections, participation in local civic organizations or leisure organizations like a bowling league, while they might seem like small things, those are actually, training grounds for democracy. They're places where we learn how to hold public office, where we learn how to handle disagreements, where we meet people that are different from us. And his kind of theory of Bowling Alone was that when those things go away, so goes our nation, and so our interest in revisiting his famous book Bowling Alone in a film 20 years later. When we started working on this project around 2020, was to kind of bring that warning, I think, back into the conversation that if we want a strong democracy, we need to be practicing democracy on the local level and not just have it be a spectator sport in Washington. And then the secondary thing is the importance on the personal level. So he also looks at the link between our health and joining, and references the work of other researchers, people like Julianne Holt-Lundstad, a researcher out of Utah, who's kind of found this connection between joining groups being as important for longevity as things like quitting smoking or exercise, and is really urging us through their research to see joining as an important aspect of our physical health also. So it's also join or die in the sense that there are physical, personal implications for us being members of things.
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that second version of it a lot while looking through your photographs on the subway. It's the despairing singletons and the connected others, and that's what I'm seeing in those pictures. I mean, again, like you could do two edits of the pictures. You could do an edit where you just saw people, and I shouldn't say all the singletons are despairing. There's this lovely old man reading the newspaper who just warms my heart, and he seems very kind of in himself and not looking
Yep.
for something else. But I think this idea of you could edit the pictures and show all the people alone, and you could show all the people together, do a different edit. And is there any way in which this project influenced the movie, or made you think about things differently when you started working on the movie, or maybe on other projects?
I think so. I think I've always been drawn to just the idea of community, and the role that it plays. And, it was one thing that I loved about getting to work for a community newspaper in the Daily News and cover local news and local community in New York. And then later at NBC, I wasn't covering New York City as much anymore, but I was flying out to other places around the U.S. and covering community issues. And I think, that interest came partly from growing up in a smaller community. My town was 10,000 people in Falls Church City. And the community life that I got to experience there growing up, I think really shaped me. And my father was a cultural anthropologist and spent a lot of his life thinking about community and kind of observing how communities interact with each other, for better or worse. And so yeah, I think that frame on the world has been something, from a young age. And then, in my personal life, I've seen how communities that I've been able to be a part of or create with friends, have been the richest things in my life. And also the beautiful things that I get to cover as a journalist are the things people do when they come together, and kind of build solidarity that comes out of working collectively on projects. So I think I for sure see that kind of thread from kind of early work I was doing to this latest project, although maybe with less headaches around the data that I was digging into when I was just photographing the subway versus, when I was trying to parse through Robert Putnam's, decades of social science data and find a way to squeeze that all into a 90-minute documentary.
So is there anything else I haven't asked you about that you'd like to bring up?
I don't think so. I mean, it was just a joy, I guess, to talk about this place that I love so much, the New York City subway. I mean, anytime I leave the city for a period of time and come back and get on the subway, it just feels like this, breath of fresh air, even as there are the rats running around on the tracks and people spilled, halal food on the floor of the subway that they've picked up at a cart, up above. There's just, it just wraps its arms around you like a warm blanket. So the chance to just talk about this place that I love so much for an hour is just a joy.
Great. So how can people find you?
Yeah, so I am Rebecca Davis, at Rebecca Davis on Instagram, posting less train photos these days, although we'll see if some Mexico City train gets in there coming out of this chat. That's probably the best way to find me, or if you want to read more about our film, it's joinordie.film. It's touring festivals right now around the U.S., and will hopefully be on a streaming platform later this year. I think those are probably the two best ways.
All right, great. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks so much. Love the chat.
You've been listening to Metropolitan Faces, the podcast about subway photography. To see Rebecca Davis's photographs, check out the show notes on our website, metropolitanfaces.com. You can follow Metropolitan Faces wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also subscribe to our email newsletter, sign up at metropolitanfaces.com, and our Instagram is Metropolitan Faces, all one word. Metropolitan Faces is a production of Noun and Verb Rodeo. Our team includes Katie Pruden, Maddie Berger, and Jean-Luc Andre Montedi. Special thanks to Julie Subrin. Our identity was designed by Jesse Reed at Order. Our theme music is Express Train by Mr. F., which is on Burning Witches Records. This episode was made possible by support from the Lang Faculty Opportunity Fund at the New School. I'm Blake Eskin. Until next time, stand clear of the closing doors.